good morning. It is a beautiful morning here in Madison, and I hope it is the same where you are too. So welcome to Beyond the Pail, WASBO's bi-monthly facilities webinar. I'm Mike Berry. I'm the Executive Director for WASBO, and we all are really excited to get this webinar series started. If you're familiar with one of WASBO's other webinars, which is called Money Talks, it sort of uses the same format, only in this case, it's not all those financial people, and it's nowhere near as boring as the Money Talks people are. This is going to be way more exciting. So let me introduce our co-hosts and the stars of the show for our webinar. We have, and these are our permanent co-hosts, whether they like it or not, Jeremiah Johnson from Muskego and Joe Ledvina from Crosse. Let me start with you, Jeremiah. First of all, the presidential debate the other night had 67 million viewers, and we're just a little bit short of that. I just noticed on our count, but we're getting close. So Jeremiah, tell us about where you work and maybe give me something you love about your job.
Yeah, thanks. Excited to be here. I have an obsession with podcasts, so now I get to actually do one, which is kind of cool. I'm from Muskego-Norway School District. We're in southeastern Wisconsin. I've been with the district since 2002, where I joined as a custodian, a part-time on-call custodian, and worked my way through the buildings and into managing a building, into managing all the buildings. And so I love being here. One thing that keeps me connected and grounded in Muskego is this community feel. So everywhere you go in Muskego, there's Warrior stickers, Warrior swag. Football games are a time when the community really comes out and employees all come, and it's just a really cool place to be. So thankful to be here and thankful to be on the podcast, sir.
Awesome. Okay, and Joe, morning.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Just want to give you a little Bears welcome this morning. I know football season started. Oh, Jeremiah. Okay. So I came to the district in 2001 from Gunderson Lutheran Medical Center. And so when I came to the district, I was the associate supervisor of buildings and grounds in 2001, stayed in that position about 6.5 years, and then became in charge of facilities, supervisor of buildings and grounds. And my title was eventually changed to director. I just love my job. And I think that the one thing that I love about my job is it's really all about relationships, right? It's the people you meet along the way, but it's also the people that you can help. And the best example I can give you is, as I was thinking about this, why do I like my job so well? This week we had a new student move into the district, a special needs student who's in a wheelchair at the middle school level. Tiny, tiny, tiny young lady. And so even though all of our areas are ADA accessible and meet the standards, she's having trouble with some things as it relates to washing her hands or looking in the mirror. And so we're making those accommodations for her, not because we have to, but because we can. And so when I think about that is we have opportunities to make a difference in people's lives, whether it's our students or whether it's our staff. And so I think that's what I like about our job. I go home fulfilled because I know that we're doing something good, not only for our students and staff, but for our community.
I'd like to retract my answer and make it all about the students. Every time I go to a presentation and Joe Ledvina's in there, he does such a good job of bringing like the heart to the job and of making it about the students and having a student co-present with him. And here I am talking about football games. So
that is about the students, Jeremiah. That is about the students. Although I will tell you that what you miss out is having two high schools where they compete against one another. That's quite a week when that happens.
Yes.
Well, if any of you are familiar with police dramas or detective series on Netflix or whatever, there's always in those like detective or police shows, there's like the savvy veteran detective, and that's going to be Joe. And then there's like the young, sort of impertinent, younger detective. That's going to be the Jeremiah role. And this is like a can't miss formula. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys work your way through all this. All right, so let me get into just a little bit about the purpose of why we're doing Beyond the Pale and why WASBO cares so much about facilities in general. So two quotes here. One is from my old professor. His name was Lloyd Froreich. He used to make us stand up and say this at the beginning of class, almost like standing up and doing the Pledge of Allegiance. We had to say, the number one responsibility of school leaders is the health, safety, and welfare of students and staff, which I will have etched onto my gravestone because he made me say it so often. And after doing this for 35 or more years, it turns out he was right. It is the number one responsibility. And if you can't remember all that, just remember this. Keep the kids warm, safe, and dry. If you do that, you're probably in pretty good shape. All right. So our idea here is to put together this little community that comes together in the form of this webinar. You get two great experts here in Jeremiah and Joe. We're going to pick a topic, and then we're going to try to talk about what good practice looks like, what pretty looks like, as one of my old friends used to say, and maybe share some of our documents, tell a few stories about it. And hopefully by the end of this little 45-minute exercise, you will have picked up a couple of good ideas or two that you can use to improve your own practice and help out at your school district, right? Because that's ultimately what this is all about, right? This is all about in service of great schools, great kids, and helping our communities. So that's the big why. Our topic for today is capital projects planning. And hopefully we've got some practical advice, but maybe we should start with something as simple as how do you define capital projects? I did this forever. We were always struggling with this. When is it just something routine? When is it operations? When is it maintenance? When is it capital? Blah, blah, blah. You guys have a way of approaching this? Jeremiah, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so I have two big buckets of money. One of them is general operations. That's like toilet paper and supplies and repairs, like smaller repairs that we make routinely at the schools. And then the other bucket is capital maintenance. And for me, it's $750,000. And that's allocated to projects of larger magnitude. And so we used to have a board policy that anything over $10,000 was considered capital. But I don't know if I can get a contractor to come in my buildings right now for less than $10,000. So recently we upped that to $100,000. And so generally it's roofs and parking lots, repainting, reflooring, bigger pieces of mechanical equipment. So that kind of defines capital projects. And I remember when I got into this role, I didn't even really understand what that meant and how there's these two separate buckets. So yeah, happy to talk more.
That makes good common sense. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, ours is very similar. In fact, we have the operating budget that we have, and that's for those things that Jeremiah mentioned, those ongoing maintenance kind of things that we do. And then once in a while, there'll be small projects that we do out of that operational budget, things that come up during the course of the year. But our capital improvements, when you think of that, we usually think more than $5,000. And so projects that we have to plan for to do, so it takes a little bit more thought. It doesn't always fit into that category, but I will tell you when we come to our budget, now we have $1.2 million a year that we spend on capital. A lot of those smaller projects will include, once we identify those bigger ones, we'll kind of fill in the gaps with other projects.
How many kids in La Crosse?
We're just under 6,000 right now.
Just under 6?
Just under 6.
Yeah.
14 years ago, we were over close to 9. So we've seen a real decline in La Crosse. So that falls into, our capital planning too, when you start having declining enrollment and tightened budgets.
Right. And what's the enrollment in Muskego, by the way?
About 4,700, and the same thing as Joe. We're declining a bit too. We were at a little over 5,000 a few years back, and it's been notching back a little bit. I think people stopped having kids during the pandemic or something.
Oh yeah, I think 75-80% of the school districts are in declining enrollment. Doesn't mean they're a declining district. This means budgets get a little tighter for sure. In some of my districts along the way, we would make it was called capital projects, but it was really capital projects on one side of the ledger and capital equipment on the other, which, so if you're buying some big tractor or something, but it's the same bucket of money. It was the capital bucket. So, okay, so we've defined it roughly. Now let's get into sort of how we manage with all this. And I think the first thing we do is put up a big stop sign, right? We stop here. Super important not to just dive in without first checking to see if you've got a board policies and procedures that say something about how you approach capital projects. You guys have a policy in either La Crosse or Muskego?
Yeah, and in La Crosse, we have one thing that drives us is operational expectations. So we have an OE12 is what we call that on facilities that tells us what we should be looking for. We should have a long-range facility plan. A part of that, how do we do preventive maintenance? What are the capital recommendations that we bring forward to the board? And so it really outlines everything. I try to remind the board of that every year, that I look at that before I bring them the projects. We also have some things that talk about good stewardship of funds and dealing with waste and environmental responsibility. And so I try to identify those things as we go through the projects, and let them know that we do our homework, that we're trying to follow the guidelines they've set forth. And so that kind of eliminates, or hopefully eliminates, some of the micromanaging that they want to do.
Right. Well, better for you to remind the board about that policy than having the board remind you.
Right.
So that, I mean, yeah, obviously, so you don't just go in there with the capital projects plan. You've obviously figured out what the rules are and what the board's desires are, and before you just jump in. How about you, Jeremiah?
We do have a purchasing policy which covers like the amounts. I don't think there's anything specific to capital planning. But we do have a Fund 46, which we can maybe talk about a little bit later. But in order to have the establishment of Fund 46, you have to have a 10-year capital plan.
Right.
So it all plays together. Yeah.
Right.
One of the things I was going to say, Mike, is to go back there is we have a board turnover. 1/3 of our board turns over every year. So when I do this capital improvement presentation, 1/3 of our board sometimes is totally new. And so just reminding them, they don't even know that there's policies out there that do that. So by reminding that, it's kind of an educational tool as well.
I have a certain amount of empathy for new board members. They usually way underestimate the amount of time and trouble they're getting themselves into when they get on a school board, especially these days. And a lot of what gets presented at school board meetings, especially from the instructional folks, is just really dense. They're talking about cut scores and all this kind of heavy duty instructional stuff and standardized test results. And sometimes they can be really baffling. I mean, I was in administrative team meetings for forever, and it was baffling to me. But when you get to capital projects and you're talking about a roof or a parking lot or buying a truck, for a lot of board members, they're like, okay, this I understand. Only they really don't. But it's where they're really, really tempted to dive in. And you just got to be aware of that. And, maybe kind of give them a little grace that, this might be for them their one chance to shine, which is fine, as long as it's channeled in the right direction. I think we have a policy here. I wanted to show it to you guys. This is actually the procedure behind a policy. This happens to be Madison, which was my last stop in my school business official days. I was a little surprised, to say the least, when I saw this policy. This is about how to award, construction and repair of buildings, which is typically a capital project, right? In this case, it was defined as $20,000, which, as Jeremiah just said, is peanuts, right? But it was the stuff at the bottom that I was like, what? About how to award when the bids are kind of close, in this case, within 5% of the low bid. There's this really elaborate process of letting local contractors match the low bid. And then there's this award process that says if you're local, you get extra points. If you're union, you get extra points. and all this sort of Madison stuff that I didn't know about. And I would have stumbled all over myself if somebody hadn't pointed this policy out before I did my first capital projects presentation with the facility director in Madison. So an example of sort of the ways of working that are captured in these policies and procedures that you need to know about. Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned something there, and I'll ask Jeremiah if he's done this, but one of the things that we've done in our area, especially when last time we built a new school in 2014, we wanted to make sure that most of the labor was local. And so one of the things that we did is pre-approve contractors so that when we bid it out, we pre-approve the local contractors for that bidding. And so that just helped a little bit of ensuring that, and I think we came out with about 84% of the workers that built Northside Elementary School were local contractors. And I don't know if Jeremiah's done anything like that in his process.
Yeah, more so when we do like a large building, like we build a building, we'll put on RFQ, a request for qualifications, and then we can shortlist from there, because you might have 20 companies coming forward. Some might have 5 employees and some might be, you know, from way out of state. So being able to vet out the local people by their qualifications is helpful. Another thing that I find kind of interesting, I'm not sure if you run into this, Joe, but 10 years ago, we had contractors coming out of the woodwork everywhere. They'd even come to school board meetings and ask why they didn't get hired for a job. And now, like, I'm lucky if I get 1 or 2 bids, period. So it's this changing dynamic where, you know, there used to be a plethora of people interested. Now it's like pulling teeth to even get a bid sometimes. Maybe there's only one, and you got to go back to the drawing board to try to get a better number.
Yeah, that's a great, thanks for great segue, because that happened to us just this last year. We were doing several roof projects, one at a middle school that had probably about 800,000 is what we estimated worth of work that needed to be done. And then we had a second bid that we put out for high school and elementary school, equaling about the same. I separated them for a reason, thinking one contractor couldn't get it all done. Well, we only had one contractor bid on one of the jobs. And so the bid was reasonable when we looked at it. We knew what cost per square foot was. And so reasonable. So we went with them, but we had a whole project that didn't get done, and that we'll have to rebid this next year. So typically we have 3 or 4 large roofing contractors in La Crosse. None of them bid the job. It was someone from out of town. And so then we had to check kind of on some references and make sure that they're a good quality and contractor. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of that.
Wow, that's really got to play havoc with your estimates of cost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. If you don't have a competitive market. So, okay, let's dive in a little bit further. About capital projects planning, you know, certainly it requires long-term thinking and long-term planning discipline, both from the facilities team, I think, in tandem with the business office, right? I think Jeremiah mentioned Fund 46, which we'll get into. It's one of the last slides because it's really kind of geeky accounting stuff. But Fund 46 is a capital projects funding mechanism, and it requires a board-adopted 10-year plan, right? But even before Fund 46 existed, it was pretty common to see school districts have a multiple-year long-range facility or capital projects plan. And the kind of the classic look is this next one. So I apologize if it's a little blurry. You're not having a stroke. Relax, it's okay. It's just the screen itself is a little blurry, and it's because I blew this up probably more than I should have. But this is just something I pulled off the website of the Oconomowoc Area School District, which does have a Fund 46 and does have, as you can kind of see, a 10-year plan. It's kind of cut off here. But this is kind of the classic look for most, or I shouldn't say most, for many school districts. It's kind of spreadsheety, and it's organized by year. And then within the year, it's often organized by, by facility or something like that. So this is kind of your classic look, right? I want to ask you guys, how do you, I don't know if Greg Maru's on the line. How do you get pricing? Where do these price estimates come from? Especially if you're trying to put in budget numbers for a project that's 5 years, 6 years, or literally 10 years out. What do you do about that? Or is it just like throw a dart at the wall?
Yeah, in Muskego, actually just this morning before the call, we have a small roof section that's failing. So we have an engineer come out, look at it, tell us like, yeah, you can patch this, or no, you're going to have to replace it. So he's calling for full replacement. And I just said, you got a budget number for a fully adhere roof for this section, so I can plug that in. So there's a lot of good parking lot engineers, roof engineers, different folks that you just have relationships with, that maybe if you're going to do a flooring project, you call the flooring person you usually work with and see what their latest square footage number is for a certain type of product. And it is a bit of a round number. And I don't know about you, Joe, but kind of comes over time. Like, a boiler is going to cost you 120 grand. So you put in a rough number, and just be prepared to be surprised on bid day. So there's that cost. And then you also got to factor in that engineering cost. So if you're going to have an engineer do it, you can't just put the price of a boiler. You have to know what it's going to cost to have a plumber or an engineer design the whole system too.
Yeah, we do it similar. There's a variety of ways we do it. We work off of experience, right? So just a number of flooring jobs we've done or roofing jobs. So I'll use that number based on that, or the latest one that we did. There'll be times when, if you have a relationship with an architect, a lot of times they will do that for you for no cost at all. And then sometimes it's those contractors. Can you give me a budget number? Kind of like Jeremiah mentioned. I think sometimes, though, what I'll do is, if I can't guarantee, I need a number and I need something that's more complicated than I can do by myself, I'll ask a contractor, but I'll pay them for their time, so that on the back end, if they don't get the job, they're not saying, hey, I did this for you, and then you went with someone else. And so just all things kind of consider, but it's mainly by experience. And then from our end, on the back end, as you look at our plan, as we get closer to funding that project, then I get more serious about getting a better number applied to that. And so we use a database where we can put a percentage in as it relates to inflation. So we could do that, and it will automatically do that for us. But I really don't do that until we get close to funding that project.
You pop some numbers in just that are arbitrary, because my capital list is probably 120 items deep. Whenever we have someone that comes forward and says, hey, you guys should do X, or a principal that wants to do something, or an AD, to validate them, I say, I'm going to put it on the capital plan, knowing full and well that, like, we got roofs and parking lots for eternity, but at least that lives there. So someone wants a new track right now. They don't want just a resurface. They want the whole new $1 million track. It's on there, and I know it's like $1 million and it's just noted, but if I were to actually do it, yeah, there's engineering and real numbers involved, but at least it's living someplace and people know that we're paying attention to it.
I think that's really the key is, it's not realistic, right? To do an RFP for something that's not going to happen for 10 years. Hell, the whole RFP might be obsolete in 10 years. The pricing's not going to hold. So I think what good practice would look like would be to have like an introductory paragraph or a cover sheet on top of this that says, here's our approach. We're using a combination of past practice, understanding of the market, consulting with engineers, consulting with contractors to give an approximation of what we think this is going to cost. It's a placeholder number. It's not a real number, right? And just be upfront about that, because practically you just can't do it. And I want to reinforce Joe's point. If you do rely on a supplier, a local contractor for information, for budget numbers, that's great. But there must be no implied promise of any quid pro quo that sort of suggests, hey, you got inside track on getting this job. That is bad business, because that interferes with the obligation when spending capital project money that you have an arm's length transaction and fair and open bid process. You cannot get caught tinkering with that process. That's trouble for you and your job obligations. So Let's, it's good to have these long range sheets and to plan it out, but let's be realistic about the accuracy and of these dollars. I think you guys had a great discussion around that.
There was one thing that Jeremiah said that I think is really important, and that is when people come to him and they have these pet projects, right? We know that we're not going to fund these, and if we do, it's going to be a very long time before we do that. But our thinking is when people come to us with those projects and they want to fundraise for something, the first thing I ask them, is it in the capital improvement book?
Right.
So that's why we include those things in our book, knowing full well we have roofs and parking lots and all those things that we have to do. But we know if it's going to be funded, it needs to be in the book because it says it's a priority, and then they can go fundraise for that.
That's great. I used to work with a guy in Madison who used to do these presentations that involved things like this, long range planning. And in front of the board, he'd say, when presenting a sheet like this one that Greg Maru did in Highmark, he'd say, there's one thing I can guarantee you. Every number on this sheet is wrong. And then, the board members would be like, what? And then he'd go on to explain, about the limitations. So it was a good and kind of humorous way to explain it and get the point across without being all serious and freaking people out. So yeah, write that one down. Every number on this sheet is wrong.
Can I ask Jeremiah a question real quick as it relates to that? So then do you have a contingency fund when you do your capital budget then to account for that when you send things out for bid?
Yeah, I try to start high level with the big number projects. So right now it's going to be roofing, knowing I have a $750,000 budget. So let's just say I'm thinking it's going to come in around 500. Then I'm starting to think about those smaller items, seal coating or painting that can fill that gap that's left. But I try not to break the bank just right out of the gate. And sometimes it's hard to trust engineers too when they put together an estimate. We had a chiller system we put in. The engineer was like, it's going to come back at 1.2 million, which I shared with the board as a matter of fact. And then it came back at 1.5, and it just has that vibe of failure all around. So like Mike said, keeping it kind of light and, hey, these are round numbers. We're going to find out what the market is going to dictate pretty soon here.
Yeah.
All right, let's roll. I want to talk about this. This is, where's the money and the planning discipline come from? So let's start from the bottom of the sheet. So Jeremiah, you mentioned 750,000. Joe, you've got a higher number because it's a bigger district. What is your district's approach to just funding that bucket of money for capital projects? So we threw a benchmark out here that I think is really, really low, which is $50 or 50 cents a square foot on an annual basis. I think when I say minimum, I think that's really minimum. But let's move up on this sheet to the middle part. A lot of it depends on the funding factors depend on your situation. Average age of facilities is obviously super important. The backlog of maintenance needs, is there no backlog or is there a massive backlog? Is there any prospect of knocking some of this stuff off in a referendum? In some districts, like the technology infrastructure gets pushed into the maintenance budget. In some cases, it doesn't. Those are all really important factors. But I think the key is to have a benchmark, to be able to talk to the board and say, we have consistently funded capital projects at X number per square foot. And this year we're proposing, something similar or whatever. I think that just having a benchmark, having a standard, something that compares year to year to year is really important. And it shows the board that you're not just making numbers up. How do you guys do it?
Well, starting from the bottom up, we're at about 75 cents per square foot, which if you read any national norms, if you're operating a hospital or a hotel, they're closer to like $2 to $3 per square foot. So when you walk in there and consistently see it remodeled, that's why. For us, and 10 years ago, our budget was $400,000. And I talked in the beginning about these two buckets, operations and capital. I was able to try to find efficiencies in the operating area and push it over to capital so that we could start to raise that up a little bit.
Nice.
So that's how we got there. We do have some generous donors in our community, some big businesses that have contributed to some big projects. And then we are setting aside pockets of money for replacement of turf and different things that help add to that 750,000. In addition, we have a parking lot budget at our high school. So students pay like 100 or 200 bucks to park at the high school. And they've given us access to be able to help the high school parking lots and with that fund. So it's kind of pulling from a lot of different areas, but a baseline is 750,000. And if inflation hits our utility budget really high, I may have to pull from that and put it back into operations to help offset those costs.
Yeah, well, we spend 84 cents per square foot in La Crosse, and I would agree with Jeremiah that the ideal situation would be $2 to $3 a square foot. But we spend 84 cents a square foot, and what I do is I share that with the board, and then I say, this is what we spend per square foot. This is what it costs per square foot to replace flooring. This is what it costs per square foot to place our roofing, to kind of give them a perspective in that. But your age of the buildings really matters. If I was spending 84 cents per square foot and we had all newer facilities or remodeled facilities, that'd probably be fine. But when you're dealing with aging facilities, we have several buildings over 100 years old. 84 cents does not go very far. And so, but I am thankful for is that we have a consistent number every year. I've talked to districts inside the state where they said, what we spend on capital budget is what we have left over after the fiscal year. And I don't know how they can manage that. And so I think as a WASBO organization, as facilities people, we have to help those individuals get some consistency, because consistency really matters, because now we can start planning for things to get done. But that's what we do here in La Crosse. And so I'm very fortunate from that standpoint, but it's changed over the years. Jeremiah said 400,000. We're at 600,000 in 2008. And thankfully we passed some referendums, some operating referendums that had money in there for capital expenditures. And that's how we got to the 84 cents per square foot. Otherwise we'd be below that market. And so that really plays into us trying to right size our district so that we're spending those capital improvement dollars in the right locations.
Yeah. This is where it really helps having an experienced business manager here. It's tough. The margins on these operating budgets in school districts are really, really thin margins. I mean, it's really tough. And often when something goes wrong, like maybe your enrollment estimate was too high, which means your revenue estimate was too high, which means your budget's now off. So here's some advice. Beware of the business manager in October. If you see the business manager coming down the hall, it might be because they're trying to fix a budget problem. And often the easiest way to find money and rebalance a budget is the curriculum money, the technology money, and the capital projects money. Those are like three big buckets that exist in a school district budget. And they're the ones that you can cut quickly. But that leads to this, chaos. The next year, you've got to double up your funding and so on. So having a good administrative team with a superintendent, a business manager who knows and understands the necessary balance of staffing numbers and compensation, critical services like transportation, and then capital projects and technology funding. It's a mix, and each one has to have its own sort of consistent allocations in order for this to work well year after year. I'm sorry, Jeremiah, I think I cut you off.
No, I was just going to comment. I love seeing people putting comments in. It'd probably be tough for us to respond to in real time, but if you're like a B&G pro, feel free to put some comments in there so people can generate some ideas off of some of the questions being asked. But good stuff going on in that thread.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to add too, you talked about business managers. We haven't said too much about that, but I will tell you in La Crosse, Patty Sprang, who's our executive director of business services, outstanding. And then our business office individuals who pay our bills. And I joke with them every year, but I said, they keep me out of jail, right? Because they're so much more knowledgeable on how we can spend funds and what counts and all those things. And so they're a big part of it. But Patty and I last Friday, we spent the day going through and looking at all the projects, taking her to every one of the schools, every one of the projects that we had just completed. So she gets a better understanding of how much these projects cost and what's going on. And she's very supportive of where she can find additional funds that we can have them understanding what needs to be done for capital improvements.
I don't know if Patty's listening, but that was Joe's shameless attempt to get himself ready for next year. Thanks. That was beautifully done, Joe.
Yeah. Hey,
In interest of time, let's move ahead to like the spring budget. So, you're proposing a budget to the board, superintendents, probably in there pitching, the business managers in there. Maybe the director of instruction is, and often it's the facility team as well. So we have an example. This is posted on our website now, from La Crosse, and it's actually two different things we're going to show you. The first is CMI, or construction and maintenance.
capital maintenance and improvements.
Capital maintenance and improvements. The other document is the PowerPoint slides that Joe uses at the board meeting, because obviously you don't want to be pouring through this long report. But let me just dive into this, because I think we want to cover some ground here so you don't run out of time. I can't show you the whole report, but again, it's available on our website under a section called Beyond the Pail, where you'll be able to find this recording and this slide deck and some of Joe's documents and Jeremiah's as well. And also, if you're listening, you're watching, and you've got a great document or PowerPoint that you want to share with us, send it to us at WASBO, send it to me, and we'll post it in that section. But you can see just from this table of contents that Joe's capital maintenance report to the board is some 25 pages long. And it lists all the individual schools. So this would be a more narrative, and have a longer, more narrative version of the spreadsheet that you saw from Oconomowoc. I love this piece at the beginning of Joe's report. It goes into the goals, the decision-making criteria, and the process. And these guys have hinted at it. I'm just going to try to drive this point home. When you're talking to the board isn't really approving individual projects, right? They're not supposed to be. They're approving a budget, which is line items and numbers. You're showing them the detail just to give them some confidence that you know what you're doing. But I think our fear for all of us is that you might have a board member who happens to be a soccer dad who looks at your project list and realizes that the soccer reno is supposed to happen 5 years from now, the year after his son or daughter is graduating from high school. And that board member is tempted to say, I think we should move the soccer reno project up to next year. That's when you've crossed a line, right? That's really no different than a board member saying, I think you should be using this product for cleaning. So the way you keep the board out of that is to make sure they understand the goals, the criteria, and the process, and that you've done your homework with a large number of people. And it's not for the board to come in and start picking projects. And you need some help from your superintendent and your board president at that point. But this set of guidelines at the beginning is as important, maybe more important than the individual projects that follow. Okay, I think we've beaten that to death. Here's just some examples. This is school by school totals and so on like that. And again, we'll post it. Then here's Joe in front of his school board. You want to walk us through a few of these, Joe?
Yeah, so what I try to do is when I take before I start talking about projects and what they cost and everything, I remind the board, these are their facility initiatives, kind of what I talked about before. Some of the new members don't even know that. And so here's the initiatives. This is what I looked at. This was a part of that criteria that we looked at before we even brought these to you as a board. Again, trying to deflect from that micromanagement piece.
Is this a picture of kids in La Crosse like taunting people from Iowa?
Yeah. So this is kids from La Crosse. All the pictures I use are our actual kids. So I take them from our different schools and ask them for pictures. So I include our own students in everything that I do. Every slide, almost every slide has a picture of students in it. Just as a reminder, the reason why we're there, right? As facilities guys and gals, sometimes we can be so focused on facilities and forget why we're there. And so that's a reminder to me and everyone else that we do.
That's great. So here you set the board up, you've reminded them that this isn't just coming out of the sky, that there are policies, there's practices, there's ways of doing work, right? You've got goals around this. And then here's kind of a typical slide. Logan, is that one of your two high schools?
That's one of our two high schools, yeah. And so what I try to show them, why are we spending money in these areas and what are we trying to do? And so I'll give an explanation, go through the slides on each one, explain what we're going to do in the process, and then give them a total for that school.
You know, just a comment that the accessibility in the band room, I mean, I think every band classroom in the state was originally created with these poured floors that were like steps like that, like levels. I wonder how much money's been spent around the state doing those in the first place. And then of course, because of accessibility, they've all gone to pretty much flat floors, right? Or just like
this is the last one in our district. And
oh
so
my gosh.
we've changed them all. We had them in elementary schools too. Yeah.
They spent so much money on that.
Yes.
Hey, pictures are worth 1,000 words. Nothing wrong with showing the board these pictures. They love this kind of stuff. The board is really rooting for you when you're doing this kind of work. They really enjoy this kind of stuff. So as long as you can hit your budget targets, they're all over it. And then I love this one. This is, again, just bringing it back to kids, Joe.
Yes. So this is our last, this is what the total projects cost. And then a reminder that everything we have in here impacts kids. And that's what I try to remind the board.
Yeah. This is a early September picture in La Crosse.
Yeah.
And I'll just share that I use a lot of pictures and now I need to start putting students into them, but I haven't in the past. So I have two presentations that I do. One is to kind of wrap up the last year's projects to show them what the return on investment was. Like this was the before and this is what it is now. Thank you. And here's what we're dealing with now and some potential costs to move forward with that. And having the presentation has helped me in the past too, because a board member might say, I didn't know anything was going on with this. And I'll just pull up the board docs from 2 years ago and say, here was the presentation I shared with the potential issue that was arising at that time.
That's great. It's rare to see a picture of 4 kids in winter gear without one Packer hat, sweatshirt, or jacket, or mittens, or gloves. Oh, there's Joe's bear. Joe's Chicago Bears mug. I think
Jeremiah's not going to let me get away with that. No.
Please do not put anything in the comments about Joe's Chicago Bears mug. All right, this is Jeremiah. This is exactly what you were just saying. I have a little bit of advice when I was doing these in Madison, and sometimes it was nice to get a photo of maybe a tennis project, for example, and then having a quote from a kid, like a picture of the high school tennis player with a quote saying, "This tennis court is the best thing that ever happened to us." So getting that combination of the facility and the kid and then a quote is a great way to drive home the point you were just making, Jeremiah. And of course, in some cases, like the slide says, you can spend $1 million on the roof and no one even know you spend a dime, right? Unless you show them. So
yeah, I did want to also add, as we talked about the projects and the list and how to manage the board's projects, the athletic director's projects. Each principal has a project. My first year in the role, I brought forward the 4 or 5 projects I was going to do, and one of the board members said, "How do we know that that's the most pressing thing?" So I created something in partnership with Andy Stefanson over in New Berlin. It's called a Trago model, where you list all the projects, then you have 5 rating criteria. So is it safety? Is it old age? Is it just cosmetic? And you weight those on a 1 through 5 scale. And if the project you're doing is the highest rated, that's the criteria that we come up with to know how to pick a project.
Yeah, that's very similar to with data or with numerics attached to the criteria that Joe listed here. The critical thing is to have criteria and have rationale. Otherwise, you're inviting the board to come in and start reprioritizing your projects, right? And of course, for everything that a board member wants to add, you got to take something else out. And now you don't have a plan anymore. So again, you need a united effort from facilities, from the business office, from the superintendent to kind of coach the board through that project. Always bring it back to kids. I think you got some great pictures here. Always talk about long-term stewardship, right? We're just all passing through, right? We do the best we can. Our job is to hand these facilities off to the next generation in as good a shape or better than we found them. And the board needs to appreciate that responsibility. Okay, just a few minutes around Fund 46. This is business manager language, and most of what happens in capital projects happens within the general fund or Fund 10, the operating fund. The big referendum money that you get, if you were lucky enough to win a referendum, comes from debt, which is the 40 funds generally. Fund 46 is kind of a unique little animal. It was created about a decade ago, and it's essentially a trust. Joe mentioned that sometimes in June you may have some dollars left over, or even earlier than that if you've done it on a more strategic or planned basis. Money goes into Fund 46 via a transfer from the general fund. So somebody has to say, we are prioritizing this, and we're going to move X dollars from our operating fund into the Fund 46, ideally year after year after year. There's different reasons for this. Briefly stated, it separates your capital improvements fund from maybe your general fund balance. So it sometimes protects your general fund balance from looking like it's too big. This protects it, puts it in its own little bucket, which is really important. And some of the more savvy business managers understand how to use Fund 46 to manage shared costs, which affect equalization aid, which is a little bit beyond our scope today. Maybe if you watch Money Talks and you really want to geek out on the accounting side, we can talk about Fund 46 someday. But the key thing here is that Fund 46 is designated for long-term capital projects planning. It's ideal for protecting funds and using them for a very specific purpose. It does require a 5-year waiting period. You can't just put it in and pull it back out. And it also requires a 10-year plan that the board has to approve and continue to approve. So if you want to know more about that, talk to your business official, or if you're a business official and you want to know more about that, go to DPI website and you can learn about it more there. So it's just part of the vocabulary around capital projects. Key takeaways from today. What do you guys think? Which one matters most to you?
I really
Well, for
loved
me-
I was just gonna say, love learning that how much Joe integrates students into the presentation and everything, and that does help, and getting quotes and stuff from students. Like I can imagine putting up a before and after picture and having a student's quote on there. Something I never really thought of before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great idea. And one of the things that sticks out to me is just have a process, right? It's not about perfection. It's about staying steady and consistent and having a process so that when the time comes, people can't poke holes in it.
Yeah, it's just a reality that gets kind of beaten into your head after a few decades that, hey, no matter what, every year, the number of demands on the school district budget is going to exceed the number of dollars you have available. You got to get comfortable with that. It's always going to be the case. In capital projects, the number of projects that are worthy far exceeds the amount of money you have to work with. You got to get comfortable with that. And so a process with criteria and steady approach, that's essential to making this work. Do something every year. It's better than a lot one year and then nothing for 5 years. Work with your business office. They are your friend and ally when it comes to capital projects. And lastly, like we've been saying time and again here, connect it back to the students. That is what we are here for. The resources we use today will be posted, as I mentioned. And I've had a blast doing this morning. I can't believe how fast the time went. So next time on Beyond the Pail, which is November 14th, we're doing this every other month. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Next time we're going to do winterization, like getting ready for winter, and all that includes, from slips and falls and salt and utilities and everything. So this is going to be a real fun topic for the facility directors. November 14th, 8:30 in the morning. Mark your calendar, put it on there now. And secondly, if you've got ideas that you want to hear us break down and present on, send them to us. Put it in the comments section. We'll take them from there. And we want this to be as participatory as possible. So any closing thoughts from, we'll start with you, Jeremiah.
Yeah, in case anybody was curious about our name, Beyond the Pail, it was actually named after Mike, because at the end of summer, this is as much of a tan as he gets. So this is Beyond Pale. And
That's right. That's
ode
right.
to Mike.
That's right. That's right. SPF 200. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I would just say this seems daunting. It can seem daunting if you don't have it all set up and the plan, but the bottom line is, you're the professionals out there. No one knows more about the buildings than you do. And so be confident, and whatever process that you come up with, you'll be successful.
Great. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for doing the good work out there. We hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. Have a great Thursday,